Ali Velshi of MSNBC flies to Doha to interview the U.S. ambassador to Qatar about how great Qatar is at an event hosted by Qatar. And it was just, we were like, is he getting paid for this?
The issue of Qatar and its role does come up, some of the misconceptions.
It turns out he's not like getting directly paid, but they all acknowledge that the Suphan Center, which was like the official host of it, and they've got tie-ups with the Qatari government. They paid his way. We assume it was business class, put up him in a hotel. They hosted an event for his book party. His wife, it turns out, is on the board of the Suphan Center. And you could just think, wow, look at how intertwined these major media outlets are with a foreign government. For quite a while now, there's been this kind of strange situation where Hamas's political leadership was living in Doha. The Qataris were funding Hamas in the Gaza Strip. And then when the attack happened, the Hamas attack on Israel, I just thought the situation couldn't stand. I thought that the Biden administration was really going to kind of drop the boom on the Qataris and say, look, this has got to stop.
There can be no more business as usual with Hamas.
As the weeks and months passed and it looked like Qatar actually was kind of taking charge of the whole situation, I thought with my colleagues at the Free Press, this was a good story to pursue. Like, how did they get so much influence in Washington?
My introduction to covering Qatar came because of a tip I got right after October 7th. And this tip had to do actually with a map in a New York City public school classroom in Brooklyn. It was a map of the Middle East, but there was no Israel on the map at all. So I started looking into this story thinking, well, that's awfully strange. And what I discovered was that the classroom where this map was hanging was actually a specialized classroom. It focused on Arab culture and arts, and it was funded by the Qatari government. I looked into it more and I found out that in the last 5 years, this group had actually given over $1 million just to the New York City Department of Education. Why is a foreign government spending money in American public schools?
Qatar was not a rich country. It had been largely a kind of a barren, very hot place that depended on pearl diving, believe it or not. Pearl diving was kind of the main point of their economy. But then when U.S. and European energy companies basically learned how to liquefy natural gas, Qatar went from being the poorest country in the Gulf to the richest country in the world per capita. So obviously, when you have that much money, that in itself makes you a player. But I would say as far as moving from the economic to the strategic on the national security front, the U.S. had a military base in Saudi Arabia, an air base. After 9/11 and the invasion of Iraq, it was clear that the Saudis were not particularly excited to keep a U.S. air base. And at that point, the Qataris kind of raised their hand and said, look, we have a facility that we've built it and we'll host you there and we'll subsidize you. And once you have a major U.S. military base, the largest in the Middle East, based in Qatar, that gave the government an incredible amount of influence over U.S. foreign policy.
Once I started realizing that there was Qatari money essentially flowing into public education, I wanted to know the extent of it. I started filing Freedom of Information Act requests with different school districts, with different public universities as well. And through that, I was able to uncover the different programs that they were running, the fact that they were running teacher training programs for K through 12 educators. Or in another case, I uncovered some emails between an educator at University of North Carolina and a program director with Qatar Foundation International, in which they were discussing why public universities might be wary of accepting funds from Qatar, but private universities that aren't subject to as much public scrutiny might be more willing. And so these were all starting to raise red flags for me.
It's likely we don't even know then how much money is actually going into American schools.
The Saudis, the UAE, have a lot of money, and they've certainly used their oil wealth to insert themselves into the United States. I think what I found so unique about Qatar was how vast it was and sophisticated. Like Fanny was talking about getting into the education system. They've kind of fused themselves into our national security structure through the Udeid Base. They partner and invest in so many different media companies. The Qataris just started buying both sides, Democrats, Republicans, conservatives, pro-Israel types, their money just went everywhere.
And one kind of hurdle and obstacle throughout investigating this story is that on the surface, the idea of providing money for American education, for increasing Arabic language study in America, that all sounds very benign. It sounds even good. It's great to kind of teach kids to speak other languages. But I think once you start to kind of scratch beneath the surface, you start to realize that that kind of money, millions and millions of dollars, it can't come without any strings attached.
It was interesting in the investigation because it was kind of hiding in plain sight. The Foreign Agent Registration Act is a DOJ law where if you're actually working as a foreign agent, you need to file and say exactly who you're reaching out to. So through that process, we were able to find, some of the big lobbyists working for Qatar. But we also kind of started to find people who were like, we could tell they were working in organizations that were getting funded by Qatar, but not registering.
There's one lobbyist. His name is Andrew King, and he formerly was actually the deputy chief of staff for Senator Lindsey Graham in South Carolina.
King did register as a foreign agent for Qatar, and his filings disclose how last year, in July, King made a couple phone calls to this guy named Bill Bennett, who's a commentator for Fox News. He's the former Department of Education secretary under Reagan. And a couple of days after one of his calls with Andrew King, Bill Bennett has an op-ed out in Fox News Digital about kind of the amazing Qatari education campus that houses campuses of Cornell and Georgetown and Northwestern. And it's all about kind of how that's a wonderful partnership. It's a very positive article. So that's just one example of what that influence can look like. It may not be overt. It's not like we're saying that Bill Bennett was paid for writing that. We have no proof of that whatsoever. But just the fact that he has that relationship with a Qatari lobbyist, you're able to see how that can really then start to impact what Americans are then reading in the news and then how that impacts public discourse more broadly.
Yeah, it was an interesting case because if you were willing to look, you could find a lot of stuff not too hard. I think a lot of people just don't want to look.
If you want to support more investigative reporting from the Free Press, become a paying subscriber today at thefp.com/subscribe.